You don't need to settle down yet. You don't need to calm your thoughts. You don't even need to rest. Just being here is enough. If you found this place tonight, it may be because something inside you feels tired of holding on to thoughts, holding on to feelings, holding on to the need to understand what is happening or what should happen next. And maybe you've already tried to let go, tried to relax, tried to quiet the mind, tried to arrive at rest. But tonight, there is nothing you need to do differently. This time is not about reaching a peaceful state. It is not about emptying the mind. It is not about becoming still. There is no posture to maintain, no rhythm to follow, no instruction you need to remember. You can listen while thinking. You can listen while drifting. You can even listen while resisting. Everything that is happening is allowed. If the body feels tense, it can stay tense. If the mind feels busy, it can stay busy. Nothing here needs to be corrected. Often the hardest thing at night is not falling asleep, but the effort we make trying to get there, trying to release, trying to soften, trying to arrive somewhere else. So for now, there is no invitation to let go. There is only an invitation to stop trying. You do not have to put anything down. You do not have to loosen your grip. You do not have to change the way you are holding this moment. Rest does not begin with effort. It begins when effort is no longer required. And even that does not need to happen all at once. You may notice that the mind keeps checking. Am I doing this right? Is this working? Should I feel different by now? Those questions can stay. They do not need answers. You are not behind. You are not missing anything. Nothing has gone wrong. This is not a process with a result at the end. There is no moment you need to reach in order for rest to be allowed. As you listen, you may notice sounds around you, or the weight of the body where it meets the bed, or the simple fact of breathing happening without instruction, or you may notice none of that. Either way is fine. There is nothing to pay attention to, nothing to focus on, nothing to get right. You do not need to stay with the words. You do not need to understand them. You do not need to remember them later. They can pass through the same way thoughts already do. This is not a place where something is asked of you. It is a place where things can be left as they are, where effort is not rewarded and effort is not required. Words will come and go. Thoughts may rise and fall. Meaning may appear and then fade. You don't need to follow any of it. Tonight is not about learning something new. It is about remembering something simple, that rest does not need permission, and peace does not need to be made. Even now, without changing anything, without choosing anything, without letting go of anything, you are already allowed to be here, and for now, that is enough. Most of the time, we don't notice how much we are holding. We hold without choosing to. We hold without realizing it. It happens quietly as part of how the mind learned to stay alert, to stay safe, to stay prepared. Thoughts keep moving, not because something is wrong, but because the mind is used to staying ready, ready to solve, ready to explain, ready to respond, ready to prevent something from going wrong. Even at night, when the body is tired, this habit can remain awake. The mind keeps a gentle grip on the day, on conversations, on moments that felt unfinished, on things that might matter tomorrow. This holding is not a mistake. It is not a failure to relax. It is not a sign that rest is far away. It is simply a habit formed over time, often to help you cope, to adapt, to move through the world. So here, there is no need to judge it. There is no need to push it away. No need to replace it with something better. You do not need to stop thinking. You do not need to slow the mind down. Thinking can continue. Planning can continue. Remembering can continue. Nothing here depends on those things ending. Sometimes the mind keeps holding because it believes something depends on it, that if it loosens its grip, something important might be missed, something might fall apart, something might not be handled properly, so it stays engaged, even when the day is over, even when the lights are low, even when the body has already arrived at rest. If you notice this tonight, there is nothing you need to change. You are not being asked to drop anything. You are not being asked to release anything. You're only being invited to notice that holding is happening, and even that noticing does not need to be precise. You might notice it as tension in the body, or as a loop of familiar thoughts, or as a sense of staying slightly alert, or you might not notice it clearly at all. Any of these are enough. Holding does not need to be corrected in order for rest to begin. Rest does not wait for the mind to become quiet. Often rest begins while holding is still present. The body knows how to soften even when the mind stays active. Breathing continues without asking for permission. The weight of the body continues to be supported without effort, and slowly, sometimes without being noticed, the grip of holding begins to change on its own, not because it was forced, not because it was released, but because it no longer needs to work so hard. There is no moment you need to watch for, no signal that tells you something has shifted. It can happen quietly in the background, and it does not require your help. For now, there is nothing to let go of. There is only space for holding to be exactly as it is, and that too is allowed. And even when holding stays, it does not stay the same. Holding shifts, it changes shape. Sometimes it tightens, sometimes it softens slightly without being noticed. The mind does not hold in one single way. Sometimes it holds through thinking, sometimes through remembering, sometimes through quiet vigilance, as if listening for something that might need attention. This is not a problem to solve. It is a rhythm the mind learned long ago, a way of staying connected, a way of staying prepared, a way of staying involved even when nothing is required. At night, this habit can feel more visible. There is less noise to blend into, fewer distractions to carry it, so holding becomes easier to notice. But noticing does not mean you need to respond. You are not being asked to intervene in this process. You are not being asked to guide the mind toward rest. The mind already knows how to move toward rest in its own time. Sometimes it does so by continuing to hold until it slowly grows tired of holding. Sometimes it does so by shifting attention without announcing the change. And sometimes Rest begins while holding is still present. The body does not wait for the mind to fully release. Breathing does not wait for thoughts to resolve. Support does not wait for readiness. The bed continues to hold the body. The ground continues to carry weight. The night continues to unfold without instruction. And in that quiet support, holding no longer needs to stay alert in the same way. Not because it has been convinced, not because it has been corrected, but because nothing is asking it to remain active. If holding feels persistent tonight, that is not a sign of distance from rest. It is simply part of how rest arrives for some minds, slowly, indirectly, without clear transitions. There may be moments when the grip feels the same, and moments when it loosens slightly. You do not need to track these changes. You do not need to recognize them. They do not need to become experiences that you remember. Holding does not need an ending in order for rest to begin. It only needs to no longer be treated as something that must be watched. And when attention stops circling it, even briefly, holding becomes lighter on its own, not gone, not released, just quieter. There is a common idea that rest begins when something is released, that if you could just let go of the right thought or the right feeling, sleep would finally arrive. But for many minds, this idea quietly adds another task to the night. Now I need to release. Now I need to soften. Now I need to stop holding. And without noticing it, rest becomes something you are still trying to do. So here, nothing is being asked to be released. Not thoughts, not tension, not attention. Even the wish to let go does not need to be acted on. Letting go is not a step. It is not a method. It is not something you accomplish. It is something that happens when nothing is being demanded, when the mind is no longer trying to reach a different state. You may notice that the idea of release creates its own pressure, a subtle sense that something should change. That feeling can stay. There is no need to remove it. This time is not about making the mind empty. It is not about quieting every thought. It is about allowing everything to remain without being managed. Thoughts can move freely. They do not need direction. Attention can wander. It does not need an anchor. The body can stay exactly as it is. Nothing here depends on improvement. If the mind reaches for the idea of release, you do not need to follow it. You also do not need to push it away. The idea itself can rest alongside everything else. Often release happens when the question of release is no longer important, when the mind is no longer checking whether it has arrived. Sleep works the same way. You do not fall asleep by trying to fall asleep. You fall asleep when trying stops. And even then, sleep does not arrive on command. It arrives when conditions are gentle enough. This is why nothing needs to be done here. Nothing needs to be finished. Nothing needs to be put down. You are not being guided toward a result. You are being allowed to stay. As the night continues, you may notice moments when effort fades slightly, not because you made it fade, but because there was no reason for it to stay. These moments do not need to be recognized. They do not need to be named. They do not need to become experiences you remember. They can pass quietly, like background sounds you stop noticing. Rest does not begin with release. It begins when release is no longer required. And even now, nothing is missing, nothing is delayed, nothing is waiting on you. Even the sense that something is unfinished can stay. You do not need to resolve the day. You do not need to close every open thought. Some things are allowed to remain incomplete. The mind often believes that rest requires closure, that everything must be settled before the body can let go. But rest does not wait for conclusions. It arrives even when questions remain, even when thoughts return to familiar places, even when the mind revisits what it already knows. There is no need to stop this movement. There is no need to redirect it. The mind is not wandering away from rest. It is moving in the only way it knows how, when nothing is being asked of it. Sometimes the effort to release is quieter than we notice. It hides inside good intentions, the wish to feel better, the wish to rest properly, the wish to do this the right way. Those wishes do not need to disappear. They can rest here too. You are not required to choose between holding and releasing. There is space for both to exist without conflict. And when there is no conflict to manage, effort begins to soften without direction, not because something changed, but because nothing was being demanded. The body understands this more easily than the mind. It responds to support, to stillness, to the simple fact that it is already held. The surface beneath you does not ask whether you are ready. It supports you without condition. And when the body senses this quiet reliability, there is less reason to stay alert, less reason to prepare, less reason to hold. This does not happen all at once. It happens in small, unremarkable moments, moments that do not announce themselves, moments that do not need attention, and those moments do not need to last. They only need to exist briefly for the direction of the night to begin changing. Nothing needs to be released for that to happen. It is already happening in its own way. There are moments when change begins without being noticed, not because something new appears, but because something stops being held in the same way. The mind does not announce this shift. It does not signal that it is happening. There is no clear line between before and after. One moment things feel much the same, and then, without instruction, without intention, the effort behind them is slightly different. This is how loosening often begins, not as an event, not as an experience, but as a quiet adjustment in how attention is carried. You may still be thinking, still aware, still awake, but the thoughts feel less urgent, less involved. They continue, but they do not pull in the same way. This is not something you need to look for. In fact, the more it is looked for, the less it can be felt, because this shift does not happen through observation. It happens when observation relaxes. Often the body senses this first. A subtle change in how weight is supported, a softening that does not spread everywhere, only to one place, the shoulders, the jaw, the hands, not because they were told to soften, but because they no longer need to stay ready. Breathing continues, but it may feel less supervised, less managed. It moves in its own rhythm without checking in with the mind. The mind may notice this, or it may not. Either way, the change continues. This is important. Loosening does not depend on awareness. It does not depend on recognition. It does not depend on understanding what is happening. It happens because the conditions no longer require constant holding, and those conditions are already present. Nothing more needs to be added. Nothing needs to be deepened. Nothing needs to be improved. Sometimes the mind becomes curious about this change. Is this it? Is this the shift? Am I getting closer to sleep? Those questions are not a problem. They do not undo what is already softened. They are simply another movement of the mind passing through. They do not need to be answered. They do not need to be corrected. They will settle on their own. Loosening is not fragile. It does not break when attention touches it. It only tightens again when effort returns. And even that is not a failure. The mind may tighten and loosen again, over and over. This rhythm does not delay rest. It is part of how rest arrives. The mind learns slowly that it does not need to maintain the same grip to remain safe, that nothing is being lost when it eases, that nothing is falling apart when it steps back. This learning does not happen through instruction. It happens through repetition, through quiet nights like this one, where nothing is demanded, where nothing is required, where nothing needs to be proven. As this continues, attention may begin to drift more freely, not away from something, but without direction. It moves the way it does when there is no task. This drifting is not distraction. It is a sign that vigilance is no longer necessary. Thoughts may become less connected, less linear. They may fade before finishing themselves. This does not need to be noticed. It does not need to be named. It is simply the mind responding to the absence of pressure. And somewhere within this, without a clear moment, without a clear edge, the sense of holding changes again. Not released, not gone, just quieter, less involved, less central. And even if this does not last, even if the mind returns to familiar patterns, nothing has been undone. The direction has already shifted, and it does not require your attention to continue. As the night goes on, this quieter way of holding may feel unfamiliar, not wrong, just unfamiliar. The mind is used to effort, used to engagement, used to staying slightly ahead of what is happening. So when effort eases, there can be a brief sense of not knowing what to do next. That uncertainty does not need to be filled. It does not need reassurance. It does not need explanation. It can stay open. The mind does not need a new task to replace the old one. It does not need a better way to pay attention. It only needs the absence of pressure to continue. You may notice that thoughts still appear, but they no longer connect in the same way. They arrive, they pause, they fade, not completed, not resolved, simply unfinished. This unfinished quality is not a problem. It is one of the signs that effort is no longer organizing the experience. Attention does not hold on long enough to build a full structure, and nothing is lost because of that. Meaning does not need to be maintained. Clarity does not need to be protected. The mind is allowed to be imprecise here. As this continues, time may feel different. Moments may stretch or compress. You may lose track of how long you have been listening. That loss of tracking is not something to notice. It happens when monitoring relaxes. The sense of self that was quietly involved in holding things together steps back, not disappears, just steps back. There is less commentary, less checking, less reference to before and after. Experience becomes simpler, not because it has been simplified, but because it is no longer being arranged. This simplicity does not require silence. It does not require stillness. It only requires that nothing be added. If at any point the mind tightens again, that is allowed. Tightening does not undo what has softened. It is simply another movement passing through. Loosening and tightening can coexist. They do not cancel each other. Over time, the mind learns that it does not need to return to full effort every time it checks in. It can check in lightly and then drift again. This drifting is not going anywhere. It is not moving towards sleep. It is simply no longer staying in place through effort. And as effort continues to fade, the boundary between listening and not listening becomes less clear. Words may be heard without being followed. Sound may be present without being attended to. Awareness remains, but it is no longer centered. There is nothing you need to do with this, nothing to stay with, nothing to remember. It is enough that the night is continuing without your help, and that continuation is already carrying you in its own direction. There is a common belief that clarity comes from trying harder, that awareness sharpens when attention is focused, that presence deepens when effort increases. But there is another way clarity appears, not through addition, but through subtraction, not because something new enters awareness, but because something stops interfering. You may notice this as a kind of ease, not relaxation exactly, not heaviness, just less resistance inside experience. Awareness remains, but it is no longer working. It does not lean forward. It does not scan. It does not check what is happening next. It simply stays. This staying does not require your involvement. It happens when effort is no longer supporting it. You may still hear sounds. You may still sense the body. Thoughts may still pass through. But none of these ask for a response. They do not require interpretation. They do not need to be placed into meaning. Awareness does not need to organize them. It does not need to hold them together. They appear and they pass without forming a structure. This is not dullness. It is not fading. It is a quiet alertness without direction, clear but not focused, present but not engaged. Nothing is being sharpened. Nothing is being improved. What changes is the absence of interference. The subtle effort that used to guide attention steps aside, and when it does, awareness does not disappear. It reveals that it never needed guidance. This may feel unfamiliar, because much of the time, awareness is mixed with effort, mixed with intention, mixed with purpose. So when those fall away, there can be a sense of openness, not wide, not expansive, simply unoccupied. Awareness no longer has to decide where to go. It no longer has to stay with one thing. It does not have to move or remain still. It is not choosing. And because it is not choosing, it does not tire. Effort is what tires. Effort is what creates the sense of strain. When effort fades, awareness becomes lighter, not brighter, not stronger, just lighter. There is less weight in each moment, less pressure to hold experience in place. This lightness is not something to maintain. The moment maintenance appears, effort returns, and that too is allowed. Nothing here depends on staying in a particular state. Awareness does not need to be preserved. It does not need to be kept open. It does not need to be protected. It continues whether you attend to it or not. And over time, this becomes clear in a simple way. You do not need to manage awareness for it to remain. You do not need to hold it steady. You do not need to deepen it. It is already present, doing nothing. This is why rest does not come from doing more. It comes when doing less is no longer a task. When effort is not replaced by another kind of effort. When nothing new is required. Awareness without effort is not a goal. It is what remains when goals fall away, and it does not need to be noticed to continue. There is a gentle habit that often stays awake at night, the habit of understanding. The mind listens and tries to make sense of what it hears. It looks for meaning, for coherence, for something it can hold on to as an explanation. This habit is not wrong. It has been useful for a long time. It helps you learn. It helps you navigate. It helps you feel oriented. But here, understanding is not required. Not now, not tonight. You do not need to know what this is leading to. You do not need to follow the logic of the words. You do not need to remember what was said a moment ago. Nothing depends on comprehension. If the mind reaches to understand, that reaching can stay. It does not need to be stopped, and it does not need to succeed. Understanding does not open the door to rest, and the absence of understanding does not close it. Rest does not depend on clarity. Often clarity arrives later, long after rest has already begun. You may notice the mind quietly asking questions. What does this mean? Am I doing this correctly? Is this the right way to listen? Those questions do not need answers. They do not need reassurance. They can appear and fade like any other thought. You're not required to resolve them. Here, words are not instructions. They are not messages you need to decode. They are simply sounds passing through awareness. They do not need to form a complete picture. They do not need to connect to each other. They do not need to lead anywhere. If attention drifts away from the words, that is not a problem. If attention returns, that is not a problem either. Nothing is lost when you miss a sentence. Nothing important is being delivered. There is no hidden meaning you need to catch. Understanding is something the mind does when it is preparing to act, preparing to respond, preparing to use information later. But nothing here requires preparation. There is nothing you will need to do afterward, nothing to remember, nothing to apply. So understanding can rest, not because it is pushed away, but because it is not needed. You may notice that when understanding loosens, listening changes. Words are heard but not held. They pass through without leaving a trace. Meaning becomes lighter, less central, less important. This does not create confusion. It creates space, a space where nothing has to be figured out, where nothing has to make sense, where the mind does not have to stay engaged to remain safe. This space is not blank. It is simply unoccupied. Awareness continues, but it is no longer busy connecting pieces. The mind does not need to know where it is in the story. It does not need to know how far along it is. It does not need to track progress. Tracking is another form of understanding, and that too can rest. You do not need to understand this moment for it to pass. You do not need to understand rest for it to arrive. Sleep does not wait for explanation. It does not wait for insight. It arrives when the mind is no longer trying to stay oriented, when it no longer needs to know what is happening in order to allow it. If understanding returns later, that is fine. It will find its place again when it is needed. For now, it does not need to lead. It does not need to follow. It does not need to stay alert. You are allowed to listen without knowing, to hear without grasping, to be present without understanding, and that is enough. You may notice that even hearing the words you don't need to understand can create a small reaction, a wish to agree, or a wish to check whether that is really true. That movement is natural. The mind has learned that understanding keeps it safe, that knowing where you are prevents mistakes. So when understanding is no longer invited, the mind may hover for a moment, waiting for direction, waiting for something to hold. It does not need to find anything. This hovering is not confusion. It is simply the pause that appears when the usual task has been set down. The mind is not lost here. It is resting between habits. You may notice a gentle emptiness in the listening, not silence, not absence, just fewer connections being made. Words may arrive without linking to the next. Sentences may end without forming conclusions. This does not interrupt rest. It supports it because the mind is no longer required to build continuity. Meaning does not need to be carried forward. Each moment can stand on its own without reference. This is unfamiliar for a mind that is used to following threads. But unfamiliar does not mean unsafe. Nothing is being taken away. Nothing important is being removed. Understanding will return when it is useful again. For now, it is allowed to step aside. You may also notice that without understanding, time feels less defined. You may not be sure how long you have been listening. That uncertainty does not need correction. Tracking time is another form of grasping, and when grasping eases, time loosens with it. Moments stretch without needing explanation, or they pass quickly without being noticed. Either way, nothing is wrong. You are not meant to stay oriented here. Orientation is helpful when action is required, but nothing here requires action. You are not preparing for anything. You are not being led toward a conclusion, so the mind does not need to stay awake to follow along. If words blur together, that is fine. If only fragments remain, that is fine too. You are not missing anything. There is no essential message hidden in the language. No point you must reach before resting is allowed. Understanding often believes it must stay close to prevent something from going wrong. But nothing here is fragile. Nothing will be lost if attention drifts. Nothing will break if meaning fades. Rest does not depend on coherence. It depends on the absence of demand. And as demand softens, understanding naturally loses its urgency, not because it is forced away, but because it is no longer needed. You may notice moments when listening continues without effort, where sound is present, but the mind does not follow it. Those moments do not need to last. They do not need to be repeated. They are simply signs that understanding has stepped back without being asked. And when understanding rests, something else becomes clear. That awareness does not depend on explanation. It does not depend on insight. It remains even when nothing makes sense, even when nothing is being understood. And that is enough, more than enough. At some point, words no longer need to do what they usually do. They no longer need to explain. They no longer need to connect. They no longer need to carry meaning forward. They can simply appear and pass. You may notice that sentences no longer feel important to follow. Not because they disappear, but because there is less reason to stay with them. Language begins to loosen its grip. Words are still heard, but they do not gather into something you need to understand. They arrive, rest for a moment, and move on. Nothing is being said that needs to be remembered. Nothing is being offered that needs to be taken. Listening no longer has a task. If attention drifts away from the words, that is natural. If it returns briefly, that is natural too. Language does not require continuity here. Each phrase can stand alone without leaning on the next. Meaning no longer needs to be built. You may notice that the sound of the voice becomes more noticeable than what is being said. The rhythm, the pauses, the tone. The voice does not need to persuade. It does not need to guide. It is simply present. As this continues, words begin to feel lighter, less specific, less defined. They may blur slightly, not because you are tired, but because attention is no longer shaping them. Language loses its sharp edges. It softens the way shapes soften in low light. You may still recognize the sound of words, but their meaning is no longer central. They become part of the background, like distant sounds that no longer ask to be identified. This is not a loss. Nothing important is being taken away. Language is simply returning to being sound. Vibration, tone, movement. You do not need to listen closely. You do not need to stay with anything. The voice can come and go at the edge of awareness. Sometimes it may be clear, sometimes it may be faint. Both are fine. Understanding has already stepped aside. Now language follows. You may notice that thoughts become less verbal, less sentence-like. They may appear as fragments or images or not at all. There is no need to notice this, no need to label it. The mind does not need to track what is happening. Tracking would bring effort back, so nothing here needs to be tracked. Words no longer point. They no longer lead. They simply drift through the same space as everything else. And because they do not point, attention no longer follows them to any destination. There is nowhere to go, no conclusion approaching, no message arriving. The night does not require language to continue. Rest does not depend on what is said. It depends on the absence of demand. As language loosens, sound becomes enough. The voice is present without needing to be understood. It does not matter which words are used. It does not matter where sentences begin or end. They do not form a structure. They do not build momentum. They do not move toward a point. They simply exist, and then they don't. You may notice longer pauses, or you may not. Time becomes less clear when language is no longer organizing it. Moments are no longer measured by meaning. They pass without reference. Listening becomes softer, not because attention fades, but because it no longer needs to hold shape. The voice may continue, but it no longer asks to be followed. It does not ask for response. It does not ask for agreement. It does not ask for understanding. It is simply there. And even that is not important, because nothing here depends on words anymore. They can stay. They can fade. Either way, the night continues, and you do not need to help it. There is nothing more that needs to be said, not because everything has been said already, but because saying more would not add anything. The night does not need additional words. It does not need another idea. It does not need another understanding. What has already softened does not need to be guided further, so the voice remains, but it does not advance. It does not explain. It does not lead. It stays close without moving forward. Words may continue to appear, but they no longer form a direction. They do not build toward anything. They simply arrive and rest for a moment and then fade. There is no sequence you need to follow, no place you are being taken. Listening no longer has a task. The mind does not need to stay alert. It does not need to check what comes next. Nothing important is about to happen. Nothing needs to be caught. If attention drifts, it drifts. If it returns briefly, it returns. Neither movement changes anything. There's no progress here, no regression either, only the continuation of the night. Words may begin to feel repetitive. That repetition is intentional, not to teach, but to remove urgency. When nothing new is offered, the mind stops reaching. It no longer needs to stay involved. The voice does not compete for attention. It does not require interest. It does not require engagement. It stays present without asking to be heard. Sentences may feel similar to one another. They do not need to be distinguished. They do not need to be remembered. They do not need to make sense together. They are simply sounds passing through the same quiet space. Meaning has already loosened. Now even relevance begins to fade. It does not matter what the words are. It does not matter how long they last. It does not matter whether they are noticed. They do not carry weight. They do not ask for response. They do not hold attention in place. You do not need to stay with the voice. You do not need to stay with yourself. There is nothing you need to do with this moment. Time may feel less distinct. Minutes may pass without being marked. There is no need to keep track. Tracking would only bring effort back, so effort stays away. The voice continues in the same way, steady, unhurried, without intention. It does not change tone to signal anything. It does not prepare you for what comes next, because nothing comes next. This is not a transition. It is a settling. Words appear only to disappear again. They do not gather. They do not accumulate. They do not move the night forward. They simply occupy a little space and then leave it empty again. Listening becomes optional. Awareness remains, but it is not centered on anything in particular. It does not hold the voice. It does not hold thoughts. It does not hold time. Everything is allowed to pass on its own. Nothing is held in place. Nothing is being managed. Nothing is being prepared. The voice does not need to stay clear. It does not need to stay present. It does not need to continue. Even silence would be enough. And yet the voice remains without purpose, without direction, without urgency, because nothing more is required, nothing more is expected, nothing more is said. The voice does not need to continue much longer. It does not need to complete anything. It does not need to reach a final point. What needed to soften has already softened. What needed to loosen has already loosened. Now the voice can begin to step back, not suddenly, not all at once, just enough to make space. Words may still appear, but they are quieter now, less defined. They do not arrive with intention. They drift in and drift out. The space between them feels wider, not empty, just open. You do not need to listen closely. You do not need to stay awake for what comes next. Nothing new is about to happen. The night is already moving on its own. The voice is no longer guiding anything. It is simply present for a little while longer. Like a light left on in another room, you may hear it without turning toward it. Sound no longer needs to become words, and words no longer need to become meaning. Everything that remains can simply be sound, tone, rhythm, vibration. The voice does not need to be understood. Soon it will not even need to be followed. It will fade into the background the way distant sounds do, still there, but no longer central. You may notice that attention no longer stays with the voice. It moves away without effort. It rests where it rests. Nothing needs to bring it back. Nothing needs to hold it. The body continues to be supported. Breathing continues without supervision. The night continues without commentary. The voice becomes just one more sound among others, and then even that distinction becomes unnecessary. There is no longer a speaker and a listener, only sound, only presence, only the quiet movement of time passing. You do not need to recognize this change. You do not need to stay with it. It will continue whether you notice it or not. The voice is already stepping aside. Soon it will not be needed at all. What remains does not depend on language. It does not depend on meaning. It does not depend on attention. It simply remains. And in this remaining, sound continues in a different way, without explanation, without direction, without asking anything of you. There is nothing to prepare for, nothing to understand, nothing to respond to. The night is wide enough to hold everything without effort. You can rest without listening. You can sleep without following. You can drift without letting go. Nothing needs to change. Nothing needs to end. The voice fades because it is no longer required, and what follows does not need words. It only needs to be heard or not heard. Either way, it continues. There is nothing else you need to do. Sometimes peace is not something we must learn. It is something we remember. The world pulls us outward, toward goals, toward noise, toward endless motion. But when the heart grows quiet, we begin to sense a deeper rhythm beneath it all, a rhythm that has always been waiting, softly calling us home. This quiet home lives inside you, but it can be easy to forget. That is why Gassho exists, not to add anything new, but to help you return. A space built for stillness, for reflection, for the gentle work of being. In its name, Gassho, there is a gesture, two hands meeting in respect and gratitude, a gesture of unity between self and world, between heart and breath, between sound and silence. When you open the Gassho app, you are not entering another screen. You are stepping into a small temple that travels with you, a place where you can sit without expectation, breathe without demand, and listen without effort. Inside you will find guided meditations, stories inspired by Buddhist wisdom, and the steady presence of sutras, not as lessons, but as companions. The sound you are about to hear is one of those companions, a sound carried through generations, a sound shaped by breath, devotion, and time. You do not need to understand the words. You do not need to follow the rhythm. You do not need to stay awake for it. Let the sound arrive as it is. Let it move through awareness without resistance. Let it remain even as attention fades. There is nothing left to do, only to rest. Let the breath settle. Let the body sink, and simply listen. The sound of the sutra continues, offered from a temple in the quiet mountains of Koya-san, shared here through the Gassho app whenever you wish to return to silence.
小法求者有因世界先生欲の調整関連特性上交友研究学習上福心所有上連定本然不利構想前所有戦因実施正常な有事銀行三万化差東海来主会欲霊死亡無効無化属性就航環境小三銀行主